Hi, I'm Josh Bernoff, author of Build a Better Business Book and 8 other books, and I'm happy to be here on A Shark's Perspective.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. I'm a keynote speaker, a strategist, a shark diver, host of this show, and your chief shark officer. How would you go about writing a better business book? Would it be a short or a long? Chock full of data or more stories? Pictures or none? Like you probably do, I have a lot of business books on my shelves. I love to read, but I will admit, many of them are not great books. Sometimes the authors babble and ramble on. Many are boring. Many of them make me sleepier than reading a college textbook. We probably share several of those same books on our shelves. So how should we go about writing and building a better business book? Josh Bernoff is the author of Build a Better Business Book and 8 other books. And we're glad to welcome Josh back all the way from episode 116. That one is definitely worth a listen to. And on this episode, we will discuss writing a better business books as stories, why you should write a book proposals that sell, writing and moving the next great book, the publishing models and their future. Why does it take so long to publish a traditional book? Are bookstores important? Ghostwriters, audiobooks, the PQRST elements of book promotion, Morgan Freeman, ChatGPT for authors, B&N versus Hudson, where lobster is a religion, and a lot more. So let's tune into a business author's kind of author with a shark's kind of shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Josh, thank you so much for joining us again today on A Shark's Perspective. Welcome back to the show. Tell us, if you will, again, a little bit about your background and your career.
Okay. So probably the most notable thing in my career was that I was an analyst at Forrester Research for 20 years. And for the 8 years since then, I have been focused on the needs of authors. I work with nonfiction authors to help them to be successful with books. And that's very much what I do all day long now.
Yeah, well, go back, everybody, listen to episode 116, when which was a couple hundred episodes ago, but it was a really good book as well, Writing Without BS. And I won't say the other words because I'm trying to curse. I'm not giving that up for Lent or something in the future, but anyway, so congrats on your newest book. I had actually gone back and I listened to it and I laughed, but this was 2-3 years ago, I think, actually, when we spoke. But you said that you were working on a book and you were amazed. You weren't sure about the title yet, but you had found that there wasn't a book on how to write a business book. And this is a fantastic book, Build a Better Business Book, How to Plan, Write, and Promote a Book That Matters. You've co-authored and authored several amazing books like Groundswell and Writing Without BS. What was the groundswell, if you will, over the last few years to get this one published and get it going? What was the inspiration, other than just you knew there wasn't a book about writing a better book?
Well, I've done 50 book projects over my career. And when I say I've been an editor, I've been a coach, I've been a co-author, I've been a sole author, a ghostwriter. And I keep finding that people who are very successful at business, at marketing, they keep making the same mistakes and having the same questions about what it takes to write a business book. And it's a very complex topic. So I put everything I know into here. This is Build a Better Business Book. It's available right now. Official pub date is in about a week, but I know they're shipping from Amazon, and you can also get it from my publisher, Amplify. And I just wanted to put everything that people need to know in one place. And I wanted to focus on the thing that people miss most, which is that business books are stories. Even though it's a nonfiction book, stories are central to what makes a business book successful.
Yeah, we're going to get into that because I love this book. This was frustrating to me because I'm in the process. As I mentioned earlier, I've worked on books. I've helped people finish books. I've authored parts of books, but now I'm finishing my own. And this guide, I mean, you can spend a lot of time on Google or Clubhouse or talk to people, but really this was like an encyclopedia. And that's what I loved about it. And I love all the people that, you brought out some heavy hitters. I mean, Dave Franklin, way back when, introduced us to each other, but
Yeah.
you've got blurbs and endorsements from Dave, from Seth Godin, Dan Pink, Jay Baer, Dory Clark, Chris Brogan, all the little folks that nobody's heard of. But you weren't playing around. But I also remember from way back when what it was like speaking with you, because I get a little bit nervous that because I'm worried you're going to correct me or at least completely judge every grammar mistake I
Oh,
make or speak, or the weasel words I use on the show, which was one of my favorite phrases. And there will be plenty since it's me, so be gentle. But let's dive back into that first topic. And I love that you address this early on in this great book, chapter 1. But it's one of the most important pieces that I think authors overlook. Authors and speakers overlook this too much. Is that business books are stories. Talk a little bit about that and how we can go about remedying that.
well, I want to first of all talk about how I learned that. Um, I wrote my first book proposal when I was still an analyst at Forrester Research. We sent it to the agent Ike Williams, who's a very successful agent, and he said, "I can't sell this." I said, "What's wrong with it?" And he said, "Business books are stories. They're about people and stories. There's no people and there's no stories in here." Because I'd written it like a research report. And I thought, okay, I could do that. And so when I came back, the book that we did end up eventually writing, Groundswell, had all sorts of user stories in there. So when I say business books are stories, there's a few elements of that. First of all, you want to think about the audience and the problem you're solving. So in general, the book is about these people have this problem and they need to solve it, whether it's investors trying to make money or, content marketers attempting to differentiate themselves or whatever. Um, the You need to collect stories, need to collect case studies, stories of your own experience, stories of your clients' experience, stories that you read from other people, interviews that you source, because that's what makes the book come alive. And in fact, there are more than 20 author stories in my own book. And the other thing is that the book itself is a story. It starts with, oh my gosh, there's a problem. Then we're going to describe the elements of the problem. Then we're going to describe how you get past that, and what the solution looks like. And then we're going to describe the elements of the solution. Well, that's just a narrative. And in fact, every chapter tends to have a narrative, which is this person had a problem. It's a typical problem. Here's how you solve that problem. Here's the backup for why that solution is valid. Here's some steps that you can do to follow that. That is a narrative. And that's what people will follow throughout the entire book.
Well, if they're not writing to fix a problem,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think they're doing? I mean, is they're either dumb, conceited? What is the issue? Because it seems like a lot of them get kind of lost and it's just about
Well,
themselves.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's certainly one thing people do is to just talk about themselves. And if you're writing an autobiography, then sure, that's okay. But most books succeed because they are business books succeed because they are useful, and that means it's very much about the other people that you're helping. And you can talk about, well, one time I had this issue and this is how I helped the person, but it should be mostly about the problem and what the solution to the problem is, because people just get disgusted with when are you going to get to the point? The other thing about stories is that they have a rhythm to them, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the absence of that structure, people ramble on, and that's how you get the business book where you're like, oh, geez, chapter 3 sounds just like chapter 2, sounds just like chapter 4. And people give up.
Sure. In the next chapter, you address why someone should write a book. And there was a passage that I really liked. I hope you'll let me read real quick. When people think about books, they tend to think of little rectangular packages of bound paper pages. They think of shelves full of books and colorful dust jackets in bookstores. Or they may think of icons on their Kindle or iPad, each a promise of a neat package of insight. But after speaking with many, many authors, I know that these are not the ways that published authors think about their books. Yes, it feels good to hold an icebound copy of all your insights in your hand and know I created this. I shared what I knew. It's all here. I love that because that really speaks
Mm.
to what you were just talking about. But why do you think someone should write a book?
Well, that unless your audience is feeling pain and you can relieve that pain, then don't bother. So the main reason is that your audience has a pain and you're trying to relieve it. And usually that's because you know something nobody else knows. You know, people are spending too much money on advertising, so I'm going to explain how content marketing works. Or, uh, you know, people don't understand that when you're doing artificial intelligence, that the data structures are central, or whatever it happens to be. But the book focuses everything down, and from that point, everything sort of springs back out. It becomes what you're known for. It becomes what your speeches come from. It becomes the structure of your consulting. It becomes a whole platform for the knowledge that people have, and the discipline that's required to boil that down into a book and a narrative is really what it takes to get your thinking to the level where it's most useful to people.
Sure. Well, later on in chapter 4, you talk about the models. And I think if
Mhm.
anybody's unfamiliar with the models, this is a great chapter.
Mhm.
Self-published, hybrid, and traditional. It's one of the questions I get asked every time somebody asks me about the book that I'm writing. What are you doing? Are you doing which of the models? But
Mhm.
to me, it seems like that we're a Barnes and Noble chapter 11. It seems like a Jenga game before we blow up everything with traditional. I'm going
Mhm.
to ask you if you, because we have these options with hybrid and self publish,
Mhm.
and obviously that keeps you out of the stores often. I know there's ways to get
Mhm.
back in the stores like Barnes and Noble, but look at your crystal ball 5 years from now. Is the next Josh Bernoff book going to be self publish or even hybrid for that matter? And they'll say that we don't have a Barnes and Noble anymore because Amazon's put them out of business as well. Where do you start to think about the models in the future?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that for business books, bookstores are not that important. And if people are wondering about that, think about the last time you bought a business book. Where did you buy it? You probably bought it on Amazon. You didn't go into a store and rifle through a bunch of books. Uh, so the main advantage of traditional publishing is their ability to get things into bookstores, and that becomes much less potent for business books. And you asked me about my next book. This it's interesting. So this book is published as a hybrid published book because I didn't want to deal with trying to pitch it to publishers and having them tell me that it had to be changed this way or that. And in fact, I have a partnership with my publisher Amplify that is much better and more powerful than anything you could get with a traditional publisher because they and I have a really a combined goal here of making the book successful. Now I have two ideas for books coming up, and this is a pretty good example of what the two different models would be. Um, I I wrote some little fictional sort of Black Mirror type vignettes that are intended to scare the crap out of people about technology. And I thought, that was fun. Maybe I could put together like 50 of those and put them in a book. That would definitely be a self-published book because I don't really imagine that I could get a publisher interested. And there's no way I'd want to deal with the overhead of trying to pitch that. On the other hand, I have a very big idea. I'm not even at liberty to talk about it, but this would be the kind of book that would change the way everybody thought about business. And that I'd go to a traditional publisher because I'd want the visibility and I'd want the clout that comes from it saying Simon and Schuster or portfolio on the side of the book. And Writing Without Bullshit got published with um with Harper Business, and I was pleased because the one thing you get with a traditional publisher, in addition to the distribution, is you get an advance. They pay you,
Right. Yeah.
so that was a really positive thing for me at the beginning of my freelance career.
It must be tough though for a book publisher to give. I'm sure you're easy to work with,
Yeah,
but it must be tough to come if I know it's you or an
yeah.
AJ Harper or some of these killers that have written, a book like this, for them to come in and say, Josh, you need to rewrite this book a different way. That to me would be really tough.
It's really all over the map. I mean, I've turned in books and gotten hardly any feedback from traditional publishers. One of the authors that I worked with, I convinced him to go to traditional. He was like, nobody's going to pick this book up. I said, no, no, this is awesome. We got an agent, we got him a traditional deal, and everybody was happy. And then he called me like 6 months later and said, oh my God, they're changing everything around. And I'm like, oh, you know, this is what happens. They start messing around with it and they're not happy with your idea.
Well, chapter 5, you talk about book proposals that sell. How much of a book proposal should be about the content of the book versus the promotion of it? And this goes with something I've kind of experienced recently as well. Publishers seem to be, in a lot of conversations I've had, looking more for you to help them move the next great book rather than necessarily write the next great book. And
Well,
maybe that's just me, but that's a big part of it today.
well, first of all, people should understand that a book proposal is necessary if you're going to pitch traditional publishers and agents. It's not necessary if you're going to deal with a hybrid publisher, which is a publisher you pay to publish your book, or it's certainly not necessary for self-publishing. But if you are going to pitch traditional publishers, a lot of what you're doing is convincing them that this book will sell. And there's two parts of that. One is you have to describe the differentiation of the book, the big idea. You have to describe how it fits in with competing books. You have to have a sample chapter that shows that you're a good writer. But equally important to all of that is your promotion plan. And I would say in many cases it's more important. Um, so that's you're now thinking about a book that's going to get published a year and a half from now and saying, all right, I'm going to appear on 27 podcasts, or I'm going to pay a publicist $40,000 to get me in all sorts of places, or my friend is a producer for Good Morning America, or whatever it happens to be. I know, for example, at Wiley, which publishes more business books than anybody else, the typical thing they say is, you need to prove to us that you on your own can sell 10 to 20,000 copies of the book. And that's, the other publishers are not quite as stark as that, but it's the same basic idea. You need to show them that you can sell the book. And at that point, you're like, well, if I could do this myself, do I really need a publisher?
Right.
But that's that's what has to be in there.
Well, and another thing you address in here about the models and about this is about promoting the book and getting it going as well, is if you will address why you think the traditional publishers need 12 to 15 months, or is it like 14 to 15 months to publish a book? Because, when you get a great idea, a lot of people will go to self or hybrid just because they don't want to wait that long.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. If you want to move fast, then traditional publishing is not for you. And the reason that that's set up that way is because you got to remember who their customers are. People like, who's the customer of a publisher? It's a reader, right? No, it's a bookstore.
Great point.
That's who pays publishers, is bookstores. Certainly the author's not the customer, and you get treated as a supplier. You're important, and so is the printer. But that means that they put that book on their fall list, right? So if you're pitching it in, let's say, January of 2024, they're going to put it on their fall list for 2025. And so then their salespeople need to understand the book, and they need to go out and prepare for it. And so that whole long process of pitching the bookstores is the reason why they move so slowly. And because bookstores are less important to business books, it's really the tail wagging the dog. You don't really want to be on that schedule, but if you want to get that $100,000 advance from a traditional publisher, that's one of the things that you're going to have to put up with.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath. Later on, you address, and I love this, co-authors and ghostwriters.
Hmm.
You, as somebody who's done this and collaborated on
Yeah.
so many different books, I thought it was brilliant as well as talking about how to work with a ghostwriter. But there was also a section in there how to pay a ghostwriter.
Hmm.
To kind of elaborate, give us an overview of how to approach, work with,
Hmm.
pay a ghostwriter, because I don't think this is as easy as people think as well.
Oh, well, I've now ghostwritten 3 books. Two of them are published and have my name on the cover as with Josh Bernoff, one of them with your friend Dave Franklin. Um, and the third one I didn't get billing, and that hasn't been published yet. That'll be coming out in a few months. And in that case, the author comes to the ghostwriter or to an agency that finds the ghostwriter and says, I would like a book about this. And I have to tell you, when I started doing that, I thought, okay, well, there must be a standard way to do this. Absolutely not. There's like 29,000 different ways to do it. So, is the author going to tell you what to write? Uh, that's what happened in my book with Dave Franklin. They had a very clear idea of what they wanted, and I wrote to their specification. In the book that I wrote about artificial intelligence, um, I was frustrated because there was no source material. And I ended up having to do all of the research myself, identify the interviews, conduct the interviews, come up with the ideas. Obviously, it had to match up to what the author wanted, but it was just like writing a book on my own idea, except that it was on somebody else's idea. Um, the book that I ghost wrote most recently came from basically slideware and pitches that this company did, a management consulting company. And I found out there's a big difference between a sales pitch and something that would actually make sense in a book chapter. Now, you talked about paying a ghostwriter. I think part of that deal is that people should get paid as they go along. So the ghostwriter is going to want maybe a third or a half of the fee, which is likely to be in the $50 to $100,000 range. They're going to want a third or half of that up front, and then to get paid on delivery of certain milestones. Um, and what I've found is that usually when the process bogs down, it's because the people hiring the ghostwriter, the authors of the book, are not available, aren't there to work with, and you can't make any progress without their help. So it's like, why did this take so long? It's because I needed you to be able
Mhm.
to write. I can't just sit here and make stuff up.
Yeah, I think sometimes people think of it almost like it's just randomly finding somebody on Fiverr, and which is the wrong way. But we've kind of gotten to that point
Uh,
where they get a nebulous person they don't know by name,
yeah,
and
well,
that's not
no,
the
no,
way to
no,
approach it.
no. It's interesting. I have a friend who's a ghostwriter, um, but he was just starting, and he got a contract to write this book for like $24,000, and I'm like, oh man, that's really low to write a whole book. And it was a disaster
Yeah.
because the author really was all over the map in terms of what they wanted, and he couldn't get anywhere. In the end, they had to drop the whole thing. And I think that that's part of the deal, is that unless you take it seriously enough to pay more than that, you're 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 going to be like spinning in circles. And a book that's written quickly for $20,000 is going to be crap, and it's going to have the your name on it. You just hired someone to write crap and put your name on it. That's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. Well, later on, you dedicated a chapter to audiobooks. Kind of
Mm.
elaborate on where you see yourself with audiobooks, where you see the future of the medium going, and so on.
Well, the audiobook part of business books is exploding. It's really, there are many, many people who are listening to books while they're commuting, while they are exercising, while they're doing other things. Um, and so every business book should have an audiobook. Now, I actually am a proponent for the author narrating the business book, the audiobook for the business book. Not everybody has got the skill to do that, and that takes hours. I mean, I'm for this book. We're looking at like 3 full days of recording for me. Um, uh, but
And then just as many for editing.
Well, you work for a producer and they do the editing to put it together. You're not just sitting in front of a
Right.
microphone. It's part of a whole production process.
Right.
Uh, but I also think that you can do justice to the book in a way that a, a actor, a hired actor can't. So I know what I want to emphasize. I know which things are important. I know which things I'm going to read quickly and which I'm going to read slowly based on how much I want you to pay attention to them. Um, so that people are willing to put up with imperfections in the narration because you're not a professional actor, but they'd rather hear from the author if they can. And so it's a fun thing to do.
Well,
Yeah.
it's odd because it took me a while to kind of come around to business books on audio. I was
Yeah.
already a fan of fiction books before,
Mm,
but business books really I struggled with, even though I listened to podcasts. It was just
yeah.
sometimes some of the authors were boring. However, I'm working heavily right now to get Morgan Freeman to author mine. So maybe
Oh, really?
no, I have zero chance and he doesn't know who I am, but I'm still trying. He was that I could live with. But let's talk then about chapter 21. What are the 5 key elements of book promotion?
Yeah, I'd say the number one problem that people have with business books is a lack of promotion. They put all this energy into creating the book and publishing the book, and then it goes out there and it's like people will find it. That's baloney. They won't find it unless you help them. Uh, and so you need to do everything you can to get the word out. And the 5 elements that I talk about, you can remember by the initialism PQRST. So P is positioning, and that's pretty simple. That's just who is the audience and what kind of a book is it. So this is a business strategy book for marketers, or this is a memoir that's aimed at people in the technology business, or this is on a how-to book for Generation Z investors. So that's the positioning. The Q is the question you're answering. So that's, how can I get more done in less time? Or how can I make sure that my business book is successful? That's every book has a question that it answers. So those are 2 things about the book that are sort of the foundation for the marketing. The R, the S, and the T are about your promotion. Um, R is reach. How are you going to get the word out to way more people than are hearing about it now? And that involves things like doing contributed articles and bylines for other sites, um, appearing on podcasts like I'm doing with you, basically connecting up with people who have a big audience. S is spread, and that is how are you going to get people to share it? So you give people things that they can share with others, like infographics or bits of video or uh, webinar links or whatever. But you want to make it possible for people who like the book to tell other people about it. And the T is timing, and that's the other thing that's a little weird about this. Everybody is used to marketing being on a schedule, but this is a launch, and that means you want everything in a narrow period of time. So in the period of 2-3 weeks before the book publication date and maybe a month after the book publication date, you want all the marketing you can possibly get to hit in that time period. And the reason for that is because the person in the target audience is like, oh, I just heard Josh on this podcast. Interesting. And then they forget. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute. There's an article by him in a Harvard Business Review online. Oh yeah, I was going to get that book. And then they forget. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute. Here's a blog post of his that got shared by a friend of mine on LinkedIn. Okay, I keep hearing about this. This thing must be the big thing. And so they buy it. So you have to have the frequency of hitting them over and over again. And that is only going to happen if the timing means that everything is in that same narrow period of time.
I love that. And it made me think because you do reference Phil M. Jones in here as
Yeah.
well. And I remember About a year ago, I think I saw him talk about this. He also said this was a year or two after he wrote
Yeah.
exactly what to say. He said, treat every week like it's launch week or something like that. And he was talking about how he had done, a year after his book, he had done 3 podcasts this week. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
think I agree with the seasonality, especially in regards to timing and getting it to launch right. But just the ongoing promotion reminds me as well that there's to this point about the key elements. I mean, if you think you've done everything once you've written the book, forget about it. That's just the start. There's
Yeah.
so much more to go. So one of the things I thought was interesting, and I was just thinking about this, and I know this could be a book later on because obviously you've talked about this in other books, but
Mm.
talk a little bit about the dreaded thing that I hate to bring up, but I have to all the time now is Chat GPT. Where do you think Chat GPT is going to play a part with business books as we go forward? Because I'm seeing way too many lazy people I know who are telling me
Mm.
they're using it as a resource to write a whole chapter.
Okay. That's a terrible chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you read stuff that Chat GPT writes, it's nice and even and boring, and it has no soul. One of the things that I tried to do was I tried to get Chat GPT to write some jokes. It's so bad at humor. It has no idea how to make a joke. And for me, wit is part of writing, a central part of writing. And that means the way you tell people stories, the way you hit people in the face with ideas, the order you put things in, none of that is possible to do with Chat GPT. Now, that having been said, it's actually a useful tool. So you can say, all right, here's some source material that I wrote. Tell me what are the main ideas in here. And you look at what it comes up with and you say, oh, those aren't the ones that I wanted to emphasize. You go back and change things. Or uh, what percentage of this is written in the passive voice? Or, uh, what do you know that other people have said that's similar to this? And of course, you got to be careful because, of course, sometimes these artificially intelligent systems make stuff up, so you can't trust it. I did an exercise recently where one of the things I help people with is book titles, and I would put a description of a book into Chat GPT and say, "Come up with 5 book titles for this." And it came up with some dumb ideas, but it came up with some good ideas too. And I thought, well, as a tool, the point is though that you wouldn't say, "Give me the right title for this," and then take the answer. No, you'd be like, what could you come up with? And you're like, no, that sucks. That sucks. Oh, wait a minute. That's a really interesting idea. And just like you can trust Microsoft Word to correct your spelling, but you should check it, you can get Chat GPT to help you with stuff in the book. Just don't expect it to write things for you because I don't want to read that crap.
Yeah, great point. Well, Josh, last time we recorded, you were living in Boston. You
Mm-hmm.
since moved, but I was asking you about your favorite kind of shark and why. It's a question I ask people just to make them laugh. And I remember your answer, the great white, because like every book, it should be that you should start out with a scare the hell out of you chapter. So I thought that was a great reference
Mm-hmm.
to way back when. But we're going to play again if it's okay. It's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I will do my best. Now I'm scared, but let's go.
All right. Number one, your time living in Boston or now to your time living in Maine?
Which is better?
Yeah.
Um, I was connected to so many people in Boston. It was great to be part of things, but I'm now surrounded by all this nature. My wife has a big space for her studio here. I love living in Maine. So this is a great place for me to be at this point in my life.
I know plenty of people that don't like living in Boston. I've never in my life met somebody who didn't like living in Maine. I don't know, it's a little too cold for me, but everybody loves it. So,
It's getting warmer.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
All right, number 2, Barnes and Noble or Hudson News?
Oh God, forget Hudson News. So Hudson News people need to understand some things about that. Um, every book that you see in Hudson News is there because the publisher or the author paid for it to be there. So you're now looking at somebody else's idea of what books you should see. Whereas Barnes and Noble, at least you're seeing a variety. Now, if you really want the answer, the right answer is give me a fantastic used bookstore, the smell of the used books.
Amen.
I went to a used bookstore in Scotland on my vacation that's built inside of a church, a reconditioned church. It's called Leakey's in Inverness. And man, I'll take that anytime over a regular bookstore.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I travel a lot
Yeah.
speaking, so to me, I do end up shopping way too much in Hudson News.
Yeah.
But I do love Barnes and Noble. It's the last bastion of hope against
Yeah.
Amazon, and at least I can get a Starbucks when I'm in there. All right, number 3. Which do you enjoy more, writing or reading?
Hmm. You know, I actually enjoy writing more. I learned something really important when became a freelancer, which is that there is nothing that makes me happier than working with text. Writing makes me really happy, and editing makes me happy too, because I read things and I'm like, this has promise, but I know exactly what's wrong with it, and I know just what it takes to fix it. I feel like I'm taking advantage of the real talent that I've developed over all these decades. So, and I like to read. The best books that I read combine to give me a feeling of fulfillment and jealousy. When I read Malcolm Gladwell, I'm like,
Yeah.
you're so freaking good. It just makes me jealous. So no, I'd rather write than almost anything else.
All right. Well, I got another reading question for you.
Yeah.
Number 4. Would you personally rather read a business book that's a short form book, like
Yeah.
120 pages? We talked about Phil Jones,
Yeah.
exactly what
Yeah.
to say, a good example. John Gordon's mini narratives and works, or a longer form book, like ones that you've written that are 60, 70, 80,000 words plus.
Well, in general, shorter is better. And definitely a lot of these longer books would be a lot better if people would just stick to the main ideas, and get it done quickly. And the typical length of a really good business book has gone down. It used to be 65, 70,000 words, which translates to 250 pages. And now we're looking at 40, 45,000 words as being typical. Now, I have to admit, you know, this is well over 70,000 words. So what went wrong? Well, the problem is, as it says right here, a comprehensive guide for authors. So I felt like it had to have everything in it, to be a comprehensive guide. And that means if you want to look up stuff about doing an index, or how to deal with page layout, or how to monetize the book once it's published, I wanted there to be something in there to help you.
Yeah, if this book had been 20, 30, 40,000 words, it wouldn't have done the
That
reader justice.
there are books on writing business books which are short, like 30, 40,000 words, and they're good, but then the person gets to the end and they're like, okay, so how do I get a publisher? Like, okay, well, that book is not going to solve that problem for you.
All right, number 5, and the most important question that you're
Yeah.
going to be asked today. And last time it was biscuits or cornbread, but we're going to switch this one.
Yeah.
Lobster in Maine or lobster in Massachusetts? It's a subtle difference, but
Well, lobster in Massachusetts is an event, but lobster in Maine is a religion. So clearly, if you're going to want to have a religious experience and surround yourself with a maritime way of doing things, then you got to have it in Maine.
great point. So, Josh, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of this awesome book, and more?
Okay, so just a few things. First of all, if you go to bernoff.com, that's my blog, you will see the book right on there, and you can buy it. And you'll be buying it directly from the publisher, which is faster than it will be if you go through Amazon. If you want the ebook, you should, like a Kindle book, you got to buy that through Amazon. And if you want the audiobook, that's coming very soon you're going to have to come back in about a week. There was a little delay because I lost my voice due to COVID. So I got to finish recording that. And if people are just interested in hearing about the content to begin with, I have a webinar coming up with Amplify. So that information is also on my site. If you search for webinar, Build a Better Business Book, you'll see the links to get to that. You'll be able to go and sign up and hear more about what I'm trying to get across here.
Well, I completely empathize with you. I had strep and lost my voice for almost a month. So I'm with you. But Josh, again, thank you very much for coming back and being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Oh, it's great to be here. And I hope the people in your audience can benefit from this. Thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Josh Bernoff, the author of Build a Better Business Book and 8 other books. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, what a great point about stories. We throw around storytelling as a topic a lot, but don't always employ the practice well. Write to fix a problem, tell a story. Don't ramble, don't make it just about you. Don't write a boring book. Incorporate your stories. And if you're trying to get that audiobook recorded like me by Morgan Freeman, well, hopefully he'll return my calls and pleas for help soon. Second, why should you write a book? Josh says basically it's when you can explain a specific pain that your audience has. Paraphrasing here, but you should be the known answer for that solution that no one else has written about extremely well or from that specific narrative. Find the niche and write your solution. Third, whatever model you go with for your book, remember that you've got to be a great marketer as well as a great author. As Josh said, not enough authors have a good promotion strategy. Writing a great book is only half the battle. After all, if a tree fell in the woods and sacrificed itself up to be the paper for your book, then would anyone hear it or know about it? Don't let your book be a quiet secret. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. And I hope that your story someday is one that gets published. And if you're going to buy a book today, then support your local bookstores, please. They are worth it. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.